So welcome to Friendship Presbyterian Church and Friendship Community Place. We are embarking this summer on a series called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And part of what we hope to accomplish is to deepen our relationships and to learn more about neighbors in our community and in the city of Chicago, to learn more about organizations that we partner with, to explore what it means to be good neighbors and what it is that moves us, what we're passionate about. We're asking our own selves 4 questions. Where are we from? What are we about? And we are asking our partners these same questions. Where are you from? What are you about? What makes you tick? And when you think about the communities that we're working in, where do you see the need for some healing or for some help? Sometimes we ask the question, where does it hurt? We also want to ask, what are you celebrating, or what is bringing you joy about your work or about this community? And then finally, what do you bring? What are you hoping to see, to build, to make, to create? And so those are the questions that are framing our Won't You Be Our Neighbor series. And today we have Joshua Wilmoth with us, who is the Executive Director of Full Circle Communities, an organization that builds affordable housing, not only in Chicago or Illinois, but in other states as well. And so I'm going to invite you, Josh, to come on in and tell us a little bit about yourself. And I would love to hear the origin story of Full Circle. Where is it from? What's it about?
Sure. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. Full Circle is a nonprofit organization that is founded on the ideal that housing is the foundation for life, that without housing, everything else is made more challenging. Access to healthcare, education, employment opportunities, future security, retirement, all measurable outcomes show that housing is essential in improving those outcomes. But it's also founded on the realization that housing in and of itself isn't the panacea or the silver bullet. And in some cases, housing, whether it's affordable, whether it is ideally located, regardless of the physical built environment, that housing in and of itself is not enough. And so Full Circle is founded on the concept that housing is the foundation, and sometimes that means that we need to provide a little bit of extra support, encouragement, love and compassion to our clients and to our residents. And so what that means in practice is that Full Circle as a nonprofit owns and develops affordable housing, and right now predominantly focused on the Midwest. And we take 75% of all of our economics in the deals that we own and develop, and we use it to fund residential services at our properties. And we focus those services on our community's needs. So we don't go into a building and say, well, this must be what this population is going to need. Instead, we come in and we ask questions. Where does it hurt? What are you struggling with? And then we try and decide what is available in the community that can provide those supports. How can we make that more accessible to the residents? And what isn't available in the community that we can use our resources to create or to augment? So that is Full Circle in a nutshell. And what that means is that in 2021, say, I think we're going to set to finish the year owning and operating a little over 1,000 units in Illinois, Iowa, and Michigan. And we're going to spend or reserve more than $1 million of our own money for services for those residents. And those services are going to be case management and recreational and family unification and childcare and elder care and transportation, meeting the needs of our residents where they are.
I am so struck by that process that you're describing, and that really does get in already to that question of where does it hurt, and it reminds me that it's that question several years ago is what Friendship was asking on the Northwest side. We were talking to the various neighbors and different entities and saying, like, where is the hurt? Like, what is the need? What is happening in our neighborhood? And the issue of housing continued to come up, and not just not simply affordable housing, but also accessible housing, and housing that was created with human dignity in mind, right? Like all of those things. And that's how we found you, right? That's how we found Full Circle, is that we started engaging in questions around housing, and we wanted to support efforts at providing housing in a part of the city where there hasn't historically been a lot of affordable housing. And so the partnership of between Full Circle and other neighbors on the Northwest side, that really is what ended up making possible the particular building that we're going to share space in at 5150 Northwest Highway. And so now to come full circle and hear you say that what will happen next, right? As we look towards opening, as we look towards welcoming in new neighbors, potentially from near and far into this space, is that we'll ask the questions again, right? What is the need? Where does it hurt? And so I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about that process itself. Like, how do you ask those questions? How do you engage the community in that process?
I think it varies property to property, but I think one of the overarching similarities is that we identify active and engaged community partners, whether it's within a location, physically connected community neighbors, or whether it is more population specific. So at 5150 Northwest Highway, our preferences are going to tend to skew the building towards veterans and persons who have one or more disabilities. And so based upon that, we are looking for community partners throughout, the Chicagoland area who are adept at supporting those vulnerable populations, while also recognizing that may not wind up being 100% or maybe even the majority of the building, although I have my suspicions. And so the partners that we look to work with, and I think in the case of 5150, I think we're going to have multiple community partners. I know we're looking very much forward to our ongoing working relationship with Friendship. I think we'll also be working with Lutheran Social Services, who of course has a wide array of program services that they can offer to their clients. And always embedded in that is having somebody who is on site directly interfacing with the residents, who is going and introducing themselves and being a part of the community, and on the one hand creating a resource guide and being a resource for here's what's already in the community, so we don't replicate efforts, and also saying, and where are you struggling? What isn't being met through this resource directory? And then trying to work to find or create or bring about that benefit to the maximum extent that we can. So it really is just dedication to having one or more people on site listening and asking questions. It's embedded in our property management philosophies, where if somebody isn't paying rent, we follow the legal processes to ensure that we have the stick of making sure that somebody is paying their rent, or I'm sorry, you might wind up getting evicted. But embedded in our notice to pay rent is an invitation to meet with us and to meet with services to talk about what the barriers to paying your rent, and learning about, if you participate in this process, you can avoid eviction even if you don't pay your rent, because we have a process to find out where you are and what hurts.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm noticing, like in my own self and in our work, is this we've worked so hard to get to this place, right? To make it happen, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like, you all have worked such a long process, and now the building process itself is running its course. But really, it's just the beginning, right? Like, it's the beginning of a really, really important process around building the kinds of relationships and building the kind of community where people will reach out, right? Like, that will tell the truth about our need. Like, one of the things that I think we've learned as we've asked these questions is there has to be a level of trust, right, for us to be able to tell one another, whether in community, like at Friendship, or in a housing facility. Well, like, here's where it does really hurt. One of the other things that I know is true, having done a lot of work in both church world and not-for-profit work, is that especially when it comes to trying to raise and find resources, we do a lot of conversation around the deficits, right, of our communities and of our folks that we're trying to help. And there's really important information in the question of what do you need, or where does it hurt. But I also think sometimes we limit ourselves, and we don't also ask the question of, well, what are the assets, and what are we celebrating, and what are folks bringing, and what's already there. And so I really appreciate the model that you've described, where it's a both and, right? We ask the questions, we search out, and we find and connect resources, but we also know there are already resources in the community. We know there are already people doing the kinds of things, and it's a matter of connecting folks with those resources, or with those pieces. But I also wonder, like, you have created spaces, and you've cultivated communities in different neighborhoods and in different cities. What have you noticed that emerges in the communities that get cultivated around the things that are worthy of celebration? Like, and I'm thinking organically about, like, what comes out of the community life of a facility or of a building that you've already had up and running for a few years. Does that?
It does. And I have a lot of different thoughts, and I want to be mindful of that there are other things worth talking about. And these are, largely anecdotal. So one of the questions that we ask when we do a resident survey is there anyone in the building who, are there other residents in the building that you see as that go-to person, the person that knows who everybody is and just is sort of looking out for the building itself? And the answers vary across the board, but we are cognizant of the fact that our own residents are, for themselves, creating their own community with their own leadership and their own struggles and their own praise and their own acknowledgement of who's doing some of this work. So it's trying to get to a piece of that. But as examples, and I'll give two. So at Milwaukee Avenue Apartments in Avondale, it was actually our first new construction building. And it was completed and allowed for occupancy on December 23rd. And the first family to moved in on Christmas Eve. It was a husband and a wife and their two children who had been homeless. And he was employed, but they were underhoused, and they met the definition of homeless, and they moved in on Christmas Eve and were incredibly thankful and joyous to be able to have their own home for Christmas, but also took an inordinate amount of pride in their new home. It wasn't very much later that we actually wound up having a fire at the property. One of the residents who had moved in had actually moved from a nursing home under one of the state's consent decrees under Olmstead. And I don't need to get into all the details there, but in essence, freeing people who have been living in institutions to select their own opportunity to live in a community-based setting. He had never cooked for himself before, and so he wound up setting fire to a can of beans on his stove, and there was, no fire damage and virtually no smoke damage because the building is sprinklered. But what that meant was there was a staggering amount of water damage and sirens going off, and etc. So it's 2 a.m. All of the residents are now awake, and many have evacuated the building. And my regional supervisor shows up to the property. The gentleman who had started the fire is unwilling to leave his unit and is sobbing because he's afraid he's never going to be able to return.
Mm-hmm.
We have several residents who are adult residents with autism who are unable to cope with the noise and the sirens and the etc. And this gentleman, who was the first to move into the building, has taken them all under his wing and is trying to keep them calm and to keep them safe, and sends my supervisor up to deal with the person whose unit was on fire, for her to simply say, no, of course you didn't do this on purpose, and we'll get it fixed. And then we created a cooking class to teach him and other residents how to cook. Mm-hmm. So that's an opportunity to not only recognize the opportunities available in the building and in the community, but to recognize the opportunities that are available in the relationships that are fostered amongst the residents in the community. And the other is a much shorter and simpler story and has less to do necessarily with the one-on-one connections within the building, but a lot more to do with what happens after the fear is gone. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of fear about affordable housing and what that might mean in a community, and that will always linger to a certain percentage. But several years ago, we completed a fully permanent supportive housing building in McHenry, in the city of McHenry in downtown. 25 units, all designed for veterans and persons with disabilities, and all serving substantially service-intensive, needy residents. The police and municipal services probably come to the property once or twice a week, and they are begging us to do another building. We have space on the site. They want to give us new zoning to go and do another 25 units because they appreciate our commitment to being there with the residents during their crisis and supporting them, as opposed to having to go out and do it in the community on an ad hoc basis. We are leery of creating sort of an institutionalized feel, but it is independent living, which means that people get to come and go as they please and so on. But it's the kind of opportunity where we had neighbors actually sell their homes when we proposed it. And now we have the county offering us additional money to do more, and the police and fire departments begging us to do it because it's so essential and so necessary. So the fear is gone, and now it's just an acknowledgement of need and of joy. So.
Wow. I just want to take that in because it gives me so much hope, and it reminds me of something I say in other contexts, but that a lot of us can't imagine what we can't imagine, right? We can't. And so I think one of the things that you all are doing at Full Circle, and that is part of, I really resonate with, and I think is part of what we understand at Friendship, is that there are visions, and in our theological language, we would say dreams and prophecies that only can be understood as they're demonstrated, right? And so this story that you just told, well, both stories really, where the things that we most hope for, right, that to provide not simply housing, which you called the foundation, right, peace, but quality of life in affordable housing that's grounded in the kinds of relationships that you've seen come alive and unfold in some of the spaces, but also to see demonstrated how the combination of housing and resources and time, right? Time to adjust, because there's the fear piece, that, and the question of what happens and what can really be possible and exciting when we move past fear. And then there's also that internalized fear for those of us who've struggled, who've lived without accessible housing, or who haven't, and have to also move through that process of trusting that the housing is solid and good and dependable, and that I'm not going to get kicked out if I make a mistake, or if I even a big mistake, right, that causes damage, right, and that's not the lived experience that a lot of folks who have been made vulnerable have. And so it seems like that is such a reason to celebrate, to have to sort of understand that it's a process, right, and it takes time, and that you've moved through this process, and Full Circle has demonstrated how meaningful change, and how meaningful it is to create a space where folks are resourced in their own homes and on their own terms, and with their own agency intact, and that actually does increase the health and well-being of the whole community, and that our goal here is to continue to demonstrate it, so we can move through fear and into that imaginative space of like, well, what if we built another building, right? What if we provided more housing? What if we do this again because it's working in ways that we couldn't have imagined? And I think that's a story folks really do need to hear. I wanted to ask you more personally, what are you celebrating? Like, what's it feel like to move through these last few years? I know that Full Circle continues to build more buildings, which means you're growing as an organization. When you think about your own work and your own leadership at Full Circle, what are some things that you are celebrating?
I appreciate the question. I celebrate every day the opportunities that my work affords me to learn and to grow and to work with people who delight me, both in my company and more broadly. I celebrate the opportunities to have the connections and the dialogues that change or allow for reflection on my part, and that do the same in the community. I remember, 5150 was actually born out of a failed attempt to do something similar a little bit further south in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood. One of the people who showed up to oppose that development later saw me eating at Sabatino's, now gone, and walked up to me and said, she was a waitress there, and she said, I'm shocked, weren't you at that meeting the other day? And I said, yes. She said, well, why are you here? I said, well, I just lived down the block and I was coming to have some dinner. She said, so you really do live in the neighborhood? I said, yes. And after 5 minutes, she had been firmly against it. And after 5 minutes of just talking with me one-on-one over my dinner, she was completely convinced that this was absolutely the right thing that should have been done for that site, and etc. Obviously, that was not the meaningful way to build support for what we were trying to do there, or quite frankly, what we're trying to do anywhere, because Full Circle doesn't have that capacity. But I think even more because that is not the way that we enter into the community on a one-by-one basis. I relish those opportunities to have those one-off conversations in communities that generally are happening right before some major event that gets the deal funded, or after it's complete and stabilized for a while, and getting to hear from neighbors. So I celebrate those items. And then I just generally celebrate the ongoing blessed success that Full Circle is having. Again, owed 100% to my staff. And I guess if there's any of it dedicated to me, it's giving them space to be them. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting time. We're getting to work on a lot of really different, exciting things. We're getting to have a lot of really interesting discussions around our impact, our future mission, our future voice. So those are the things that are bringing me joy.
Awesome. Thank you. Sometimes I think we don't take the time that to celebrate like those things, to even stop and say like, well, what is like really worth our attention in terms of celebration. And I think one of the pieces that we hope to invite folks continuously into as we think about what it will mean to be the facilitators, the host, the hospitality of the space at 5150, the Friendship Community Place space. One of the things that we hope to do is celebrate a lot, right? To be a space where celebrations are had. And we're really excited and looking forward to doing that with all of you. And I'm appreciative that you name like how important in the organization all the staff is, right? Like you've got folks who are doing internal work and outreach work and on-site work. And so, and I think, you know, for us at Friendship and on the Northwest side in the community where 5150 is coming into being, that's our window. That's what we know about Full Circle. And so as you think about more collectively, as you were naming some of the ways that you have are discovering your impact is growing and that you're thinking more comprehensively, tell us a little bit about that impact. Like when you think about in the Midwest, like say a little bit more about what you're bringing into that conversation, maybe around what's happening in terms of the imagination that we have around housing, right? Like what's happening in more of a big picture. We know, particularly in light of the pandemic, that the need just continues to grow. And so is there an impact that you are thinking about in terms of that larger picture?
I mean, candidly, the need is so staggering across all housing types, across all communities, that I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it in terms of the volume, because we could build 100,000 units and still not meet the need for affordable housing in Chicago. We could build millions of units across the country and still not meet the need for affordable housing across all of the spectrum. So I think instead what I focus on, and maybe unusually for me, is the successes. I am motivated by pursuit of growth. I am motivated by my own internal advancement, intellectually, capably, etc. And so if I get a review of something that says, well, you did good here and this is what you need to work on, all I heard was, this is what you need to work on. And, yeah. But so unusually for me, acknowledging and recognizing that against a backdrop of a pandemic, I think we have a total of 6 people who are currently under threat of eviction across our more than 1,000 units, 2 of which predate the pandemic and are for issues not at all related to paying rent, and the other 4 during the pandemic, 3 I think in relation to paying rent, but in relation to, early on when the pandemic seemed like it was going to be a thing, so February of 2020, we rolled out a rental assurance program. Basically, if you come and you talk to us before you're late on your rent, we're going to work with you. And then every month, we'll remind you when rent is due, come talk to us. anyone who came and talked to us, we never filed any paperwork. We never, like, we knew where they were, we knew what their struggles were, and we tried to help them solve it. If we did outreach and you didn't show up and you wouldn't engage with services and you wouldn't sign the paperwork that allowed you to apply for rental assistance supports from the city or from IDA or from whoever, then you had a little bit less of my sympathy. And the only recourse that we had left was, again, the stick of potential eviction down the road. So all by way of saying, I'm delighted that across our portfolio, 6 people are in any way at risk of losing their housing, only 4 because of the pandemic. Like, that is, I think, a massive testament, maybe to Full Circle, certainly to the concept of housing that is affordable across a wide range of incomes. And so I look for ways to take that learned experience as eviction moratoriums expire to inform what and how we think of our engagement with keeping people housed. And how do we message that to our staff and message that to our residents so that it remains successful but still allows us to pay the bills? And then how do we message that more broadly so that maybe it is less threatening for other people to try, and at least housing insecurity can be somewhat evened out instead of having such fits and spurts subject to the vagaries of the rest of the world. So I think that's a space that I'm interested in trying to be a little bit more of a demonstrator on. And then otherwise, I'm just really excited by the really wide array of things that we're getting to work on right now. We're getting to work on acquisitions, adaptive reuse of old historic buildings, housing for particularly vulnerable and marginalized populations. Just a lot of really fun and interesting concepts that I think are, in some cases, have never been tried before. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate the innovative spirit of Full Circle that you hold alongside this compassion piece, right? That and understanding that to affect long-term outcomes, we have to attend to people where they are and ask, again, all the way back to our first question: where does it hurt? What's happening? What do you need? And how can we think about solutions collectively and relationally, rather than from a I'm thinking about how we often use power in our organizations, right? And oftentimes power is really held in a one-directional way. And what I'm hearing you say is that there are rules and there are policies and there are procedures, and there is a way to develop shared problem solving and sharing power and paying attention to what folks need when they engage and tell us. And so I really appreciate that alongside the innovative work that you're doing. And I'm excited to keep hearing and learning from you all and from the work that Full Circle is doing. So I want to bring our conversation to a close, but I wanted to close by just giving you a little space. Any thing that you're really hoping for, or something that you can't wait to see come into being, particularly at 5150 on the northwest side of Chicago, a community that we, some of us live and work and have poured so much time and effort into.
I'm really looking forward to getting a feel of the completed units. Really looking forward to see what the inner spaces in the first floor of 5150. I mean, we're going to have this grand lobby area, which is fairly different. Our norm is to have a community room, and if we're lucky, the community room is in some way connected to an outdoor patio space or something similar. And here, in addition to the fantastic space that we're working with Friendship to help see complete, we are going to have this fantastic grand circulation space with a refreshment hub and a pool table and a piano that really just sort of breathes through the space, a dedicated arcade and game room, which I'm really interested to like help furnish and see finished. I'm just really excited to see what we can do, and what we can do, quite frankly, fairly fiscally responsibly. I mean, on the one hand, it's an almost $30 million development. And on the other hand, there are developments right now that we are trying to get approved where the price is coming in at close to $600,000 a unit. Now, a lot of that is supply issues, and you know, the labor market is insane right now. But we did a really good job of maximizing every dollar spent on 5150 in a way that is pretty hard to replicate. And so I'm hoping that it shows as the high quality that was designed, and that the ways in which we were prudent with our resources is invisible to, I imagine it will be invisible to most. I'm hoping it's invisible even to me, even to Lindsay, even to you, who, you know, are in the space day in and day out. So
yeah, I'm super excited about everything you've said, but mostly the arcade game room, and that it's going to be like adjacent to where I go to work every day. I'm just going to spend, it seems like maybe a good part of my day doing some one-on-ones and organizing meetings in the game room. I am also excited to see how that gets furnished and finished. And we too are really excited to cultivate similarly a space where folks might find helpful, but more importantly, actually feel compelled to spend time because it's fun, right? Spend time because it's a source of connection. Spend time because there's things happening, whether it's arts or cooking classes or other activities. And so we are very excited to partner. I think there was a moment now over a year ago, you and I were having a conversation and dreaming big about what kind of block party extravaganza might opening this building look like. And so much has happened in the world and in our work between then and now. But I really do look forward to what we co-create together and how we celebrate it. So thank you for being with us today, Josh, and for all the work you and everyone at Full Circle does.
Well, Shauna, thank you, and for all of your support and encouragement and compassion and availability to help see this through to where it is and going forward. I really value working with you, and I really enjoy the opportunity that we're going to have to create community. So, thank you.
Thank you.